Now we're joined by ABC News contributor John Cohen. He's a former senior official at DHS in Republican and Democratic administrations and a former police trainer. John, thanks so much for joining us. As we heard, the president spoke about potentially using the Insurrection Act to quell the Minnesota protests. So let's just start with the very basics. Tell us about what the Insurrection Act is and how it works.
The Insurrection Act can be invoked by a president, but its invocation is a last-ditch effort. It can be used at the request of the government, request of a governor, or the president can invoke it on his own to suppress an insurrection, rebellion, or unlawful obstruction of federal law. The challenge for the administration is, while they may be able to make a legal case that the act can be invoked, those who oppose the invocation of the act will raise concerns that it's the government's own actions in the conduct of and how they're conducting their enforcement operations and dealing with protests that's actually one of the catalysts for the current unrest in Minneapolis.
So tell us, what's the precedent for this?
Well, it's a law that goes back to the 1700s, and it was intended as a way that the president could take steps if an act of rebellion exceeded the capacity of state and local officials to maintain order, or to deal with an invasion by a foreign army coming into the United States. So like I said, it was intended to be invoked under the rarest of circumstances. And what it essentially does is it not only deploys U.S. military to the streets of a U.S. city, but it suspends prohibitions that preclude them from engaging in law enforcement activities. And this goes back to the earliest days of the Republic, where British troops would regularly go in and search colonist homes and engage in law enforcement actions. So this is something that's very fundamental to the foundation of our republic. So
we've already experienced several cities in this country where the National Guard has been brought in. What would it look like in Minneapolis if the president did invoke the Insurrection Act there?
Well, it would visibly look very similar. You would see U.S. military vehicles with armed soldiers on the streets of the city. They may be engaging in direct law enforcement activity, detaining citizens. But you're asking the right question, because while the president may have legal authorities to invoke the Insurrection Act, the question is, what's the purpose? In the current environment, as a law enforcement professional, I doubt that sending armed military who have very little experience in handling crowd control activities and whose primary job is to locate the enemy, engage the enemy, and kill the enemy, whether that's the skill sets you need on the streets to deal with demonstrations and protests that are becoming increasingly destructive and violent. What should be happening is state and local law enforcement and the feds should be working together to deal with the immigration enforcement activities and the increased protests.
So we're looking at images in the split screen here of the smoke and of officers versus protesters in the streets. What kind of impact do you think bringing troops would have on this current situation?
I think it would probably make the situation worse. I mean, part of my concern and the concern of law enforcement professionals is that you watch these videos depicting ICE and Border Patrol personnel, in groups running up to cars, screaming and yelling and swearing and dragging people out of cars. As you watch videos such as the one earlier where they are walking up to people randomly and asking where they were born and for their identification. When you see Border Patrol or ICE officers yelling, screaming, swearing, pushing, kicking, or pushing down individuals who are in public areas, photographing them, when you see, people in motor vehicles who may be blocking traffic, which, by the way, isn't a federal offense, being pulled out of their cars and handcuffed and thrown into a van, those raise questions about the constitutionality of what's being done operationally and whether the force being applied is excessive. So I think I totally agree. I agree with the president, and I agree with Secretary Noem that something needs to be done to de-escalate the situation. But part of that solution is taking a hard look at the conduct of how the operation is being carried out.
John Cohen, so appreciate your insight and time. Thank you.